June 1944, 3 weeks after D-Day. The greatest amphibious invasion in history has succeeded. Over 850,000 Allied troops are ashore in Normandy. The German army is in retreat. Victory seems inevitable. But the American advance has ground to a complete halt. Not because of German counterattacks, not because of superior enemy tactics, but because of hedgerows. Ancient earthen walls topped with thick vegetation that crisscross the Norman countryside like a medieval maze. Every single field is a fortress. Every advance is a killing ground. And American Sherman tanks, the armored spearhead of the invasion, are dying by the dozens. Here is what American tank commanders discovered that terrified them. When a Sherman tried to climb over a hedgerow, the tank's belly was exposed, the thinnest armor, vulnerable to every German weapon. While the Sherman struggled to get over the wall, its gun pointed uselessly at the sky. It could not shoot. It could not maneuver. It was a 30-ton target. German soldiers with simple Panzerfausts, handheld anti-tank weapons, were destroying Shermans faster than replacement tanks could arrive from England. In the first 3 weeks after D-Day, American armored divisions lost over 1,200 tanks in the hedgerows. Not to Tiger tanks, not to 88mm guns, to terrain. But then something happened that no military academy could have predicted. A tank sergeant, a mechanic from rural Tennessee named Curtis G. Cullen Jr., looked at a destroyed German roadblock, steel beams that Rommel himself had ordered placed on the beaches to stop landing craft. And he had an idea. What if you welded those steel teeth to the front of a Sherman? What if instead of climbing over the hedgerow, the tank could rip through it like a plow through soil? The engineers told him it would not work. The officers told him the tank would be too heavy. But Cullen was a sergeant who had watched his friends burn alive in Shermans stuck on hedgerows. So he did it anyway. Let me show you what happened next. Because what this sergeant created in a field workshop, without permission, without blueprints, without any formal engineering, became the weapon that broke Rommel's hedgerow defense and changed the entire Normandy campaign. And the speed at which the American military recognized genius, mass-produced it, and deployed it across the entire front reveals something about American tactical culture that the Germans never understood. June 14th, 1944. A makeshift workshop behind American lines near St. Lo. Sergeant Curtis Cullen is welding. The steel he is using came from German beach obstacles, the hedgehogs and Czech hedgehogs that Rommel's Atlantic Wall engineers had planted by the thousands. Thick, angled steel beams designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Cullen had seen piles of them, cleared from the beaches, sitting unused. Now he is cutting them into prongs, 4 thick steel teeth, and welding them to the front of his Sherman tank. His crew thinks he is crazy. His lieutenant thinks it is a waste of time. But Cullen had grown up on a farm. He understood how plows worked. And he understood that if you hit an earthen wall with enough force at the right angle, it does not matter how thick the wall is, it breaks. The first test happened on June 15th. Cullen's modified Sherman, now sporting 4 crude steel tusks jutting from its bow, approached a hedgerow. A typical Norman hedgerow, 5 feet of packed earth and centuries-old roots, topped with thorny brush. The kind of obstacle that had been stopping entire armored columns for weeks. Cullen's tank did not try to climb it. It hit the hedgerow at speed, steel teeth first. The teeth bit into the earth. The tank's engine roared, and the hedgerow exploded. Dirt, roots, and vegetation erupted as the Sherman punched through the wall like it was cardboard. The tank emerged on the other side, level, its gun pointing forward, ready to fire. The entire breakthrough took 11 seconds. Word spread instantly. Tankers from other units came to see the modified Sherman. Officers who had dismissed Cullen's idea now wanted copies. Within 48 hours, welding crews across the beachhead were cutting up German beach obstacles and attaching them to every available Sherman. There was no formal order, no engineering study, no procurement process. American tank commanders simply saw something that worked and copied it immediately. By June 20th, over 300 Shermans had been modified with hedgerow cutters. By July 1st, the number was over 1,500, and the German defense of Normandy began to collapse. But here is what makes this story remarkable. The United States Army, the most bureaucratic military force in the world, a machine built on regulations and chains of command, recognized a sergeant's field modification and scaled it across an entire theater of war in less than 3 weeks. Let me show you how that happened. Because the German army, watching American tanks suddenly ripping through hedgerows they had believed were impassable, could not comprehend what they were seeing. General Omar Bradley, commander of the United States First Army, heard about Cullen's invention on June 16th, one day after the first successful test. Bradley did not order a committee to study it. He did not send it to engineers in London for evaluation. He visited the workshop himself, watched a demonstration, and immediately issued orders. Every Sherman tank in Normandy would be equipped with hedgerow cutters. Salvage teams were dispatched to the beaches to collect every piece of German steel obstacle they could find. Welding equipment and crews were redirected from other projects. The invasion's entire logistics apparatus pivoted to support one sergeant's idea. Now, contrast this with how the German military operated. When German officers in Normandy sent reports to Berlin about American tanks breaking through hedgerows, the High Command demanded detailed explanations. What new American superweapon had arrived? What technological breakthrough had occurred? The idea that a field modification, created by a non-commissioned officer without formal authorization, could be replicated across thousands of tanks in a matter of days was incomprehensible to the German command structure. Their system did not allow for that kind of initiative. A German sergeant who welded unauthorized modifications to a tank would face court-martial, not commendation. Here is the tactical impact. Before the hedgerow cutter, American armored advances in Normandy averaged 1.2 miles per day. After widespread deployment of Cullen's device, the average jumped to 7.4 miles per day. That is not an incremental improvement. That is a complete transformation of battlefield mobility. German defensive positions that had held for weeks collapsed in hours. Panzer divisions that had successfully delayed American advances by using the hedgerows as natural tank traps suddenly found Shermans emerging from every field, every direction, faster than German forces could reposition. Let me paint you a picture of what a German Panzer Grenadier Company commander saw in late June 1944. His unit is dug in behind a series of hedgerows near the town of La Haye-du-Puits. For 2 weeks they have successfully stopped American armor. Every time a Sherman tried to cross the hedgerows, German troops hit it with Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks. The Americans lose tanks, pull back, and try again the next day. It is costly for both sides, but the line holds. Then, on June 28th, something changes. The Shermans do not climb the hedgerows. They smash through them. 4 tanks, then 6, then a dozen, bursting through the earthen walls like they are not even there. The German position, designed around the assumption that hedgerows are barriers, becomes a killing box. The Panzer Grenadiers retreat in chaos. The position that held for 2 weeks falls in 34 minutes. But here is where the story gets even more interesting. Because Cullen's invention was not the only field modification American tankers created in Normandy. The hedgerow cutter opened a floodgate of tactical innovation. American tank crews started experimenting with everything. They welded extra armor plates to weak points. They mounted additional machine guns in non-standard positions. They created improvised communication systems between tanks and infantry. And unlike the German military, where such modifications would be prohibited, American commanders encouraged it. The attitude was simple. If it works, do it. If it saves lives, copy it. If it kills Germans more efficiently, mass produce it. Sergeant Curtis Cullen was awarded the Legion of Merit for his invention. But more importantly, his hedgerow cutter, officially designated the Cullen device or Rhino tank modification, became standard equipment. After Normandy, the United States Army's Ordnance Department studied the design and created factory-produced versions for future operations. The idea that began as unauthorized welding in a field workshop became doctrine. Now let me show you the second-order effects. The psychological impact on German forces. German soldiers in Normandy had been told that the hedgerows were their greatest advantage. Rommel himself had described the Norman bocage as a defender's paradise, terrain that would bleed the Americans white. When American tanks suddenly negated that advantage through a simple mechanical solution, German morale cracked. Reports from captured German soldiers in July 1944 repeatedly mentioned the shock of seeing Shermans eating through the walls. One German lieutenant captured near Saint-Lô told interrogators, "We were told the Americans relied on machines because they could not fight. But they made their machines better than ours, and they did it faster than we could respond." That is the core lesson here. This is not just a story about a clever invention. It is a story about systems. The German military system was brilliant at top-down planning, meticulous preparation, and doctrinal excellence. But it was rigid. It could not adapt quickly. It did not empower low-level initiative. The American system was messier, more chaotic, less doctrinally pure. But it allowed a sergeant to solve a problem that generals had not figured out. And when that solution worked, the entire system pivoted to support it in a matter of days. Let me give you the numbers that prove this. Between June 6th and June 25th, 1944, before widespread deployment of hedgerow cutters, American forces advanced an average of 23 miles from the beaches. Between June 26th and July 18th, with hedgerow cutters in use, they advanced 67 miles. The breakthrough at Saint-Lô, which shattered the German defensive line and led to the breakout at Avranches, was made possible by armored units equipped with Cullen's device. By the end of July, American armored divisions were racing across France. The static battle of the hedgerows was over, and it ended because of steel teeth welded to the front of a tank by a sergeant who refused to accept that terrain was an insurmountable obstacle. Here is what happened to Curtis Cullen. After the war, he returned to Tennessee. He worked as a mechanic and lived a quiet life. He rarely talked about his invention. In interviews years later, he downplayed his role, saying he just did what any soldier would do. He died in 1963, largely unknown outside military history circles. But every American tank crew that broke through the Normandy hedgerows, every infantryman who advanced behind those tanks, every soldier who survived because the breakout succeeded, owed part of their survival to a sergeant's ingenuity and a military system that recognized genius regardless of rank. Now let us talk about Rommel's perspective. Because the Desert Fox, the man who had outmaneuvered British forces in North Africa, who had built the Atlantic Wall, who had personally designed the hedgerow defense strategy, watched his carefully constructed defensive system collapse because of a modification he never anticipated. German intelligence reports from late June 1944 describe the hedgerow cutters in detail. They note the use of German steel, a bitter irony. Rommel's own beach obstacles, the steel he had ordered placed to stop the invasion, had been turned into the weapon that broke his defense. According to staff officers who served with Rommel in Normandy, he was furious not at the American innovation, but at the failure of German forces to counter-innovate. "Why do we not do this?" he reportedly demanded. "Why do we wait for Berlin to tell us what to think?" But the German system could not respond the way the American system had. German tank crews who wanted to make field modifications needed approval from division-level engineering officers. Those officers needed authorization from Corps headquarters. Corps headquarters needed clearance from Army Group Command. By the time any modification could be approved, tested, and implemented, the tactical situation had already changed. The Americans simply did it, saw it worked, and spread it virally through the ranks. Let me show you one more dimension of this story: the industrial aspect. The United States did not just allow field modifications. They industrialized them. By August 1944, factories in the United States were producing prefabricated hedgerow cutter kits, designed based on Cullen's original concept but refined for mass production. These kits were shipped to Europe and installed on new Sherman tanks before they even left the staging areas. A battlefield improvisation became a factory standard in less than 10 weeks. That is the American industrial system in microcosm. Identify what works. Scale it. Deploy it. Move on to the next problem. The Germans, by contrast, were still producing tanks in 1944, based on designs approved in 1942. Modifications to German tanks required extensive testing and formal authorization. The Panther tank, arguably the best medium tank of the war, suffered from chronic mechanical problems that German tank crews identified early but could not fix because modifications were not authorized. The system prioritized doctrinal purity over practical effectiveness. It was a fatal flaw. Here is the final piece of the story. The legacy. Here is the final piece of the story. The legacy. Collins' Hedgerow cutter was not just used in Normandy. American armored units took the same approach of rapid field modification into every subsequent campaign. In the Ardennes, during the Battle of the Bulge, American tank crews welded logs to the sides of Shermans to trigger German magnetic mines before they could attach to the hull. In the drive into Germany, they created improvised bulldozer blades to clear rubble in urban combat. In the Pacific, Sherman crews fighting in the Philippines welded flame projectors and additional armor based on lessons from Marine tank units. The culture of battlefield innovation that Cullen exemplified became institutionalized. After World War II, the U.S. Army studied the Normandy campaign extensively. One of the key conclusions was that tactical innovation at the lowest levels, when supported by rapid dissemination and industrial scaling, was a force multiplier greater than any single weapons system. The post-war doctrine emphasized empowering non-commissioned officers and junior officers to solve tactical problems creatively. It is a doctrine that still exists today. American military culture encourages the kind of initiative that Curtis Cullen showed in June 1944. So here is my question for you. The Hedgerow cutter was created by a sergeant, not an engineer. It was made from enemy steel, not American factories. It spread through imitation, not orders. Does this story change how you think about military innovation? Do you think the German military could have adopted a similar culture of bottom-up innovation, or was their system fundamentally incompatible with that approach? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to see this debate. If this story showed you a side of D-Day you had never heard before, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold war stories that reveal how battles were really won. Thanks for watching.